Okay, so in developing our color pencil technique Smashbook, this is what the finished Smashbook looks like. And then, if we open it up, we can see that each of those areas, based on the technique that's demonstrated with gradient, with tertiary colors, and with marker overshading techniques, all right, we end up with this pretty cool overall design. Now, the only rules you need to follow are the techniques that you're demonstrating, as well as the rules that govern how we create tertiary colors with mixtures. Obviously, if we want to go within the tertiary area, we want to go with prismatic colors. So in this instance, I went red to red-orange into orange, and in this instance, I did orange into yellow-orange to yellow. So when we look at the Smashbook open, you can kind of see the transition of that color as it goes down this middle section of squares. On these two sides, I did the blue into the tertiary color into blue-green into yellow-green. So I did blue into blue-green and then yellow into yellow-green. So that's kind of the transition, the analogous blend from blue into blue-green into yellow-green to yellow, and then on the outer edge here I did the red to red-violet, and then I did the violet to blue-violet to blue. So I created that tertiary blend, almost every tertiary blend on the color wheel in this section. The marker overshading, you can use any colors you want. One of the things that you want to consider, though, depending on the marker, the color that you're using, in this one I used a tan, and then I did a brown over top. So kind of creating a shade of that brown color. In this one I did this darker blue, and then I used a white, and I created a highlighted edge gradient. Kind of makes it look somewhat frosty. In this triangle, which just fell off, I did a transition with a blue value, and then I used white and blue over top, so there was a gray color underneath. And I used blue on one side, and I used white colored pencil gradient going left to right. On this one I did a pink marker color, and then I did a red gradient all around here. And in this one I did a green marker, and then I did a darker green colored pencil, and I created a gradient which creates an interesting overall overshaded look. So these are the sections in the middle that are all going to be based on gradient. So I chose to do a gradient, a gradient, a gradient, a gradient, a gradient. So on all four, 1, 2, 3, 4 triangles, and this one I did a gradient. I made the choice, instead of doing another gradient here, since I already did 4 and 5, I made the choice here to do these 4 areas, 1, 2, 3, 4, all with tertiary transitions. All right, gradient, tertiary transitions. And then, of course, the marker overshading, I did the same thing. I did the bottom, 2, 2, and 1, all with marker overshading. And I think overall it balanced out really well. So in this section I've got gradient, 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 gradient. Every one of these should be a different color. You can choose any color you want with colored pencil. So it doesn't matter where you start. You just want to make sure that you're demonstrating. Doesn't matter where you start. You just want to demonstrate strong control, adding and subtracting pressure. So in this one, the entire area is going to be a gradient. So I've got a, let's say, my 1 value version of this color, and up here I'm going to have the rich, intense version of that color. If I go against or up against outside the mark, that's okay, because I'm going to be cutting these out carefully when I go to mount them onto my Smashbook. All right, so starting off the outer edge with more pressure, and I could start off in this area with the light version of the gradient, whatever the lightest version I can of the pencil. You notice I'm using it by the side of the pencil, and I'm slowly doing small circles like I would do with a regular pencil, and I'm just adding pressure as I work my way towards the middle. And I can see a bit of a jump there, so I know I'm going to need to go back and blend that a little bit more. So I keep coming up to where it gets dark. I add a little bit of pressure and create that gradient as I work my way down. just lessen the pressure, create a nice smooth transition with my colored pencil, go back in, so I have a nice color value scale all the way down. So now I'm going to continue that process with any colors that I want to. Again, the gradient on these triangles, since these triangles are going to be cut apart, the gradient should stop at the middle of the triangle like you see there. Same thing, I go dark to light, dark to light. That kind of creates a highlight on the folded area of the gradient. Now if I don't like a color, maybe I don't think these two colors are going to work well together. Maybe they will. I could always use any of the area outside here to look and see what a gradient of that particular color might look like. This isn't terrible with this magenta color, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to use my yellow ochre and create a gradient there. Now even though I don't have to control to the edge of the triangle, I do need to control the pressure so that I have a smooth gradation. You notice I'm still getting darker as I go. I'm not trying to go too dark too quick. Alright, so that gradient highlight is there. Now I know, as I look at it, now I can come back in and I can start to increase the intensity of the color as I get further away from the highlight. So now I will continue that over here. Now when we get into the tertiary colors, remember you have specific tertiary colors that you need to remember to work with. So in this instance, let's say I wanted to go from violet into red-violet into red. Alright, so violet, red-violet would be in the middle to red down here. And I'm only labeling that just so you guys can see what I'm trying. So again, I got my crimson red and I've got my violet colored pencil, and again, when you're creating tertiaries, you always want to start with the darker value and then overlap and burnish with the lighter value. Now red and violet are very similar, but violet is the darkest. So when I come up to create the red violet in here in the middle, it's going to stem from the violet. So I'm going to start at the bottom with the violet. And again, the best way to create a good tertiary color, start with the darker value color first with light to medium pressure. So as I get up into this middle area of this diamond, I want to have a nice medium violet pressure, and of course down the bottom it's going to be much darker. So here's where my transition is going to start into the red violet. So I'm taking that violet up into where the red past midpoint. So now down here I got my more intense violet, and then it kind of creates a gradient where they start to overlap. Now I'm going to pull the red right through the middle to create that red violet. If I went backwards, I went violet, red. Doesn't really matter. I'm going from red into red violet to violet. So I'm creating that analogous blend. Now if it doesn't really burnish enough, if it looks like it jumps too much, I can bring the violet just with light pressure over top of the red where I put it underneath, kind of making a red sandwich there. And I can burnish the two together that way. Maybe even pull a little bit of the red down, and then I just overlap the violet, creating a nice smooth red violet. Okay, so here we're going to do the tertiaries. I did red and red violet there. You just need to make some choices on what you plan on doing, where you plan on doing it. Now with the markers, I could choose any color markers overall for this. Obviously markers that are too light I may not have the ability to make adjustments with colored pencil, but in this case I got a light cerulean blue, and I'm going to test out that color. That's kind of nice. I could use a dark colored pencil over top of that. So with the marker overshading, I'm just going to again stick with this one, and this one with the marker, but in the triangles, remember you're only using one color. Now, the best way to use the markers is like a brush. So you can see I'm not coloring in my triangle here. I'm kind of marking across the surface and then right along that edge to try to get a nice smooth version of that marker. Alright, so it doesn't matter which markers I use, I can go along. I might want to consider what markers I'm using next to one another. So maybe over here I'll come in with this darker green color. That way I could put a nice light color over top of that. I'm going to try to get a nice clean edge here. Even though I'm cutting out the edge, I want this edge right here to be very clean. So I could use the chisel tip of the marker, try to come right along that edge, and now I'll just continue that brush technique. You can see the more I go over it, the darker it gets. Alright, so I want a nice smooth green color there. Alright, now all I have to do is consider how to make the overshading technique look cool. So I've got a dark color, definitely. I want to go over it with a light color. I could use a white, I could use a yellow, and I could even see, well, what color would look best over it. So if I put some technique out there, yeah, the yellow is kind of cool. Maybe I'll create a yellow gradient going yellow to green over here. So I can come in and put an intense version in of the yellow over top of the green, and a little bit transparently shows up, and then I can create a fade or a gradient, a color gradient, all the way down to the edge of that triangle. Alright, on the other one over here, since it's a light blue, maybe I could come in with a different blue, but a colored pencil version similar to that blue, and maybe I'll go up against the edge with the triangle, and then I'll create a border gradient. So it's darker along the outer edge up against here, and then I'll just kind of create a nice soft gradient coming off the outer edges and transitioning to the light marker color inside. Alright, so when I'm finished with all this, I'm going to first put together my 3 squares. So we're going to do that part together, and then we're going to cut out all the shapes and we're going to glue them down so that we have our finished Smashbook.